Is an S-trap on a toilet legal? Well, the short answer is twofold. Absolutely, and definitely not. Welcome everyone to another session of Plumbing School Q&A, where today Kevin, a longtime former apprenticeship student of mine, reached out with the following image of some rough-in plumbing in a new home build he's been working on, along with this question. Please see the attached picture, which consists of the vertical stack on the right side, picking up double lavs from the floor above, then coming through the subfloor, picking up a bathroom on the horizontal, and then finally connecting a toilet downstream on the left side. I see an S-trap on the toilet, but apparently I'm told this is legal. My issue is with the toilet drain returning to a vertical position before meeting its vent. Isn't this illegal? Thanks so much for your question, Kevin, and great to hear from you after all these years, to know that you're still eager and willing to put yourself out there. Awesome. I can see why, looking at this image, you might be intuitively thinking that there's just something not quite right about this plumbing configuration, given all the rules you've been taught in trade school, particularly about venting rules. But is there something illegal about this piping arrangement? To understand why this might look strange to you, confirm whether this configuration is actually illegal or not, let's go back to the classroom for old time's sake, look at a few details. So let's start again with the image that Kevin sent us, and this time I've labeled it so it's a little more clear. So what we have here essentially is, you can't really see it because it's behind the insulation, but we've got a 3-inch stack that continues up from here. It's going along the vertical wall, and then it continues up 3-inch full size and goes up to open air. So this is essentially your requisite, or one of the requisite 3-inch stacks that has to continue up to open air per building code. But what this is actually doing is utilizing the 3-inch stack to actually pick up fixtures as well. So we can't see it up here, but what we have is our 2 dual lavs that are being served above, on the floor above, and from the lavs going downward, this whole section is acting as a wet vent. Wet vent simply means that it's conveying both drainage and air. So 3-inch, way more than enough size for what we're working with here. Downstairs, or actually in the subfloor below, we've got a bathtub that's being picked up at 1.5 inches, making its way down, and then finally picking up this pipe here, which is going to be a toilet. And this is Kevin's issue. He's looking at this, he's saying, this just doesn't seem right. Something's wrong with this. This looks like an S. And this is where he gets the notion of S-trap from. So let's look at this a little bit differently, just for clarity's sake. I redrew this in isometric, so it makes a little bit more sense. Now, I never saw what the upstairs looks like, but I imagine that it's going to be, because if you look at the previous picture, it seems to go through the floor, and then it seems to jog into the wall, and I imagine the dual lavs are being picked up probably along the outside wall, and then ultimately goes up to open air. So this whole portion from the double TY, picking up the dual lavs, going down all the way to the toilet, that is all wet vent. That's conveying both drainage and air. So that's not the problem here. The big question is this an S-trap? Before we can establish whether there's anything wrong with this, let's first talk about what a trap is, particularly an S-trap. So what I have here is a lavatory, and generally speaking, if there's such a thing as an unwritten rule of plumbing, is that all fixtures must be trapped. This is because traps are designed to stop stinky sewer gas from entering the building and causing health issues or harm to the people, the occupants, so they don't breathe it in, and because you got nasty stuff in sewer gas, particularly hydrogen sulfide and methane gas, which can wreak havoc on the health of an individual. So you want to keep those sewer gases out. So the intention of a trap is essentially to trap a liquid seal. So in order for a trap to be a trap, you have to have a liquid seal that it's got to be able to contain water. And in our plumbing code, it's a minimum depth of 38 millimeters or 1.5 inches. If rule number 1 is all fixtures must be trapped, rule number 2 would be all traps must be vented. The reason why you need to vent a trap is to ensure that that trap seal that's protecting the building from sewer gas doesn't get siphoned out in the event of pressure imbalances in the system. So we add a vent to maintain that pressure imbalance at atmospheric, so that if there are disruptions in the system, like when somebody flushes a toilet or uses another fixture, or there's negative pressure in the system for another reason, then that vent will prevent the trap from becoming siphoned. So we've established that much so far. So just looking back quickly here, does this S satisfy the definition of a trap? I would say no, because even though it is indeed an S, we haven't talked about S traps yet, but it is in the form of an S, does it trap water? No, it does not trap water. Okay, this is turning this way, going down, and then making its way out. So we still haven't established whether this is legal or not, because it does look kind of weird, and there are a lot of things to look at here. But back to this, a classic S trap would look like this on the fixture. Now, there's your trap, and yes, it indeed does trap water. It would trap water up to this point here. But the issue is that if you have siphonage in the system, or negative pressure downstream, say from a high volume toilet, when toilet gets flushed, it might create negative pressure down here and suck out the trap. Even if you vent this, let's say I end up throwing a vent down here. By the time that this ends up getting siphoned out and air gets introduced into the system to break the siphon, it's too late. The seal has been compromised and you risk the likelihood of sewer gas entering the building. So this is why S-traps are blatantly illegal. They cannot be installed in the rough end of a plumbing system. Okay, so we have to do something different in order to properly trap and vent this. As long as this vent is below what we call the trap weir, then the trap is not protected by the vent. So in order for us to properly vent, we can do it in one of two ways. We will need to install what's referred to as a P-trap, which looks like this. It kind of looks like a P on its side. And this is different from an S-trap because when we add we have very specific rules in adding a vent to a P-trap. I won't get into those now because that's a topic for a whole other video, but we need to add the vent either in this fashion, which we refer to as back venting, or we can install it this way. We add a second trap here, and let's say this goes right down. Now, as it stands right now, this is actually acting as an S-trap right now. This is an S-trap until we vent it. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually vent it, not as a back vent, but what we refer to as a continuous, in this case, individual and continuous waste and vent, meaning that the vent is a vertical continuation of the drain here. Okay, this is totally legal, notwithstanding all the other venting rules with minimum and maximum distances, etc. That's a completely different, that's a topic for a completely different video. Okay, now the question is, are S-traps legal in any situation? And so now let's go back to this. What will be installed here is a toilet, and the toilet's a special fixture because let's take a closer look at a toilet. A toilet has an actual S-trap built into it. This is referred to as an integral S-trap because if you look inside a toilet, you will see a water seal, particularly the North American toilets. It'll flush, make its way here, and there's a special reason why a toilet has an S-trap. The reason why the toilet's got an S-trap is because it's actually designed to siphon out. Remember, we were talking about how S-traps are illegal in plumbing systems because they're subject to siphonage. Well, in the case of a toilet, especially the North American toilets, they're designed to siphon out. That's what gives a toilet that strong flush when you flush it, and then you hear that glug, 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 glug. Now, when you hear the glug, glug, glug at the end of the toilet's flush, what's actually happening is that as this is being siphoned out, air, once the trap seal ends up flushing out, getting siphoned out as much as possible, that glug is the air that's returning back into the toilet and breaking that siphon. So with a toilet, ironically, even though S-traps are illegal, you want an S-trap on the toilet. Okay, so they're illegal in a plumbing system, but they're legal for vertically discharging fixtures, namely toilets. But as with all other fixtures, you will still need to vent the toilet. But the question is, how do you vent the toilet? Because the trap is integral, it's built into the toilet, where do you put the vent? Because remember, vents are often installed to protect the traps. Not only to protect its own fixtures, its own trap, by the way, but it's also intended to protect the traps of other fixtures. Okay, it just maintains a balance of air in the system. Funny thing about venting a toilet in particular is that you're not necessarily venting the toilet to protect the toilet itself. You are to a certain degree, especially if you have other high discharging fixtures in the system like other toilets. Okay, but you're actually venting the toilet to protect other fixtures from the discharge of the toilet. Because whenever you flush a toilet, you've got all that volume of water going down the drain, and that volume of water pushes the air forward. If that air has nowhere else to go, such as up through a vent that might be attached to it, it may disrupt the trap seals of other fixtures downstream of that toilet. So it's also to protect other fixtures. So the question is, where do we put this toilet vent? Before we get to that, let's look at a little bit of code so this makes a little bit of sense. So what I have here is a couple of important things here, particularly code number 2. Except for wet vents, where a vent pipe is connected to nominally horizontal sanitary drainage pipe, the connection shall be made above the horizontal center line of the sanitary drainage pipe. Okay, so a couple things. First of all, it's actually excluding wet vents in this case. Let's look at what this code is actually trying to say. In this case, I've got a T-wire sanitary T on its back, so to speak. I drew this 3-inch. It might be serving a toilet, and what we have coming out the branch is the dry vent for what might be a toilet, only because it happens to be 3-inch. This could be a bathtub if it was a different size. It doesn't matter. Dry vent serves the same way. So the rule with this is that when you have a dry vent, whatever the horizontal center line is of the trap arm that the vent is serving, the dry vent itself cannot go below the horizontal center line of the trap arm. The reason for this is that if it was installed any lower, whenever you discharge the fixture, you'd end up waterlogging and blocking the vent and actually getting water into the vent. The vent's not designed to be drained. You're supposed to install the vent as direct as possible up to open air in most cases. Now, it does specify in the code except for wet vents. Now, let's look quickly at our image here. And if you notice, we've got a tub and shower being picked up on its side here. Or possibly just a bathtub. And this is where that code comes into play. Normally, you need to discharge above the horizontal center line, but this Y is on its back and it's just discharging normally because the idea is that a wet vent is intended to serve both air and water. So that even though this vent is vertically parallel to the tub and shower's trap arm, it doesn't really matter because this pipe is acting as both a drain and a method to convey air to the lower fixtures, namely the tub and shower and the toilet here. So that's one example of where this rule doesn't apply. So I think this is part of Kevin's confusion because when you look at the toilet installation here, this is the drain for the toilet. The vent, now this is a wet vent, but if we drew a dry vent, because the toilet doesn't know whether it's a dry vent or a wet vent, all the toilet cares about is that it's receiving air. Okay, but what's looking really weird here is that the air that's being conveyed by the toilet is not only on its side, like that rule says, but it's actually below the toilet's fixture outlet pipe. So I think this is where the confusion is, or part of where the confusion is. So the big question is, what's the deal with toilets? Is this legal? Okay, so we established there is no S trap because there's no water being trapped. So that's fine so far. But what about all of this nonsense here? You've got all this turning and you've got this drop before it actually ends up arriving at an air source. So in order to understand that, we need to look at a few other things. Okay, particularly, let's start by looking at this. And this is 7563 location of vent pipes. Particularly, sentence 2, the trap arm of water closets of S-trap standards or of any other fixture that also discharges vertically and depends on siphonic action, that's a toilet, for its proper functioning shall not have a cumulative change in direction of more than 225 degrees. Let's revisit our diagram here. And what it's saying is, in most cases, actually, let's look at this. When you look at a regular P-trap fixture, the normal change in direction is actually a maximum 135 degrees. So if we look at our lavatory, we've got a change in direction of 90 degrees, and then it ends up reaching at the vent. So that maxes out 135. We're well within range here. But a toilet is treated a little bit differently, a little bit special, because it's allowed to have a cumulative change in direction of 225 degrees And that is to accommodate for the 90. That's your first turn. So we got 90 degrees here. And then you're allowed to add another 90. Okay, so at this point, we are at 180 degrees. And then finally, if we zoom in here, we've got a 45 here, which will give us a grand total of 225 degrees before it arrives at its protecting vent. So that's actually legal. That's not a problem. We don't have an issue with that. Okay, so far, no trap. It's not a trap. And we don't violate the maximum change of direction of the toilet. Now let's revisit that code again. It also goes on to say, a vent pipe that protects water closet or any other fixture that depends on siphonic action for its proper functioning shall be located so that the distance between the connections of the fixture drain to the fixture and vent pipe do not exceed 1 meter on the vertical plane and 3 meters on the horizontal plane. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So the code says for a toilet, in order to connect the protecting vent, you must connect that vent within 1 meter of the vertical plane, or 1,000 millimeters, and within 3 meters of the horizontal plane, which is effectively a developed length of 4 meters. So anywhere within here. And the reason why you have to think about this, because remember, the toilet itself is a siphonic fixture. Once the water gets discharged down here, and this trap is siphoned out, the damage has been done, so to speak, in terms of siphoning out the toilet. Again, we want the toilet to siphon out, but we still need to add a vent because rule number 1 says all fixtures must be vented. So what do? Where do we put this vent? So as long as we put it anywhere within this area here, you're good. As soon as you put it outside of that area, you're no good. Now, but it doesn't say that this needs to be a perfect 90-degree angle. We still have to take into account the maximum change in direction of 225 degrees. We still have that allowance. And what that means is, in simple terms, you can actually install a vent this way. This is what's referred to as back venting. Okay, and by the way, we're not going to get into it today, but when you have a P-trap fixture, you can't connect any closer than 2 pipes as diameter from the trap's weir. When you have a toilet, toilets always treated special. There is no minimum distance. You could connect that vent right there as soon as it exits the toilet's flange, and off you go with your back vent. You can connect it this way. You can also connect it that way once it changes to horizontal, and there you go. That's legal too. Now, taking that into consideration, and also taking the fact that we have up to 225 degrees of change into consideration, of direction change into consideration, why can't we do this? Where we have 45-degree change in direction, and after that 45-degree change, we back vent it off that 45-degree direction change. This is perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's the case, then why can't we vent it like this, where we have our change in direction, and instead of the air being picked up this way, the vent is being picked up on the horizontal of that Y connection. And that might still look weird to you. But taking all rules into consideration, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. With that said, I think it's important to point out something really important here. So I'm showing the drain here on the vertical. This is technically nominally vertical. Which actually is what makes this dry vent legal to be connected to. Because if you recall, code 75622 dictates that you cannot connect a dry vent above the horizontal center line of a horizontal pipe. So this is not a horizontal pipe, this is a vertical pipe. So it's totally legal. Now, with that said, I do not recommend this method of connection because it is very likely that over time, as this drains down, if you have your Y in this configuration, that what might happen is you might end up getting solids making its way into here and blocking the vent. So you don't want to do that, but for all intents and purposes, this is legal. You can actually connect it this way. Now what's not legal is if you have a dry vent that's connecting to a nominally horizontal pipe, just like code reference 75622 dictates. You cannot connect a dry vent this way because, first of all, over time, if this gets blocked, there's no way to service this vent here. So this is a definite no-no. With that said, what you can do is you can connect a wet vent upstream of that in this configuration. If this is a wet vent, this would be legal. Because even though this is acting as a vent, whatever this is connecting to upstream, maybe a lavatory, sink, whatever it may be, you've always got constant flow coming here that's washing out any solids that may build up here, number one. Second, you can always access this piece of piping because it's a drainage line and you'll be able to run a snake through it at some point in the drainage system. So this is totally legal. This is not. Let's revisit our toilet. And the toilet, again, has no idea that whether this is a wet vent or a dry vent. We meet all requirements per venting rules. Therefore, if you look at this image and you look at the original drawing, you'll know that we're well within our limitations. Even though all these drops and turns makes it look weird and possibly illegal, nothing wrong with this. Perfectly fine. And looks like some care was put into the installation too, might I add. So there you have it, Kevin. Taking all respective code into consideration, Ontario code in this case, and by the mere fact that most North American toilets are actually designed to siphon out in order to function properly, I can only conclude that there's absolutely nothing wrong or illegal about this configuration you've shown me. Anyone else who may be watching and shaking your head at me, or maybe even your fist, please do let me know in the comments if you disagree with my assessment. Meanwhile, Kevin, I hope this clears up any confusion. And again, I encourage you, never stop learning. If any of you guys like this video and you got some value out of it, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date with more content in the future. Meanwhile, speaking of toilets, if you want to know how to properly and professionally install or replace a toilet step by step, be sure to watch this video right here.